I would echo, I hope this is in order, Mr. Speaker, I would echo what the Honourable Member for Birmingham Yardley said about the tone and nature of any forthcoming general election campaign. And you'll be pleased to note these are the conclusions of my remarks, this insight that I'm about to deliver to the House. Because when you quite rightly ruled me out of order for saying I was going to make a pro-Remain speech, when in fact I'm making a pro-election speech, the point I wanted to make was that with a little bit of Brexit inside me, not wanting the Honourable Lady for St Albans has perked up. Not wanting, I obviously do not want to be part of a European superstate. And often I say to my Remain friends, if at any point the European Union said to us, you can only stay in the European Union if you join the single currency, I would be the first to man the barricades and call for Brexit, even, dare I say it, a no-deal Brexit. But what was left behind after the referendum, and what I hope we get back if we call an election, Mr. Speaker, is an understanding of the role of this incredible institution, Parliament. Because we know that the people voted to leave the European Union, but the sort of paranoid, hard-right, hard Brexiteers decided that any other version of Brexit apart from their own was somehow snatching their hard-won victory. When you know, Mr. Speaker, that the role of this place as a representative chamber and representative democracy is to take that instruction and to interpret it as best we can. And my rebellious streak emerged, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid, when we had a hardline Brexit proposed, an almost impossible circle to square, leaving the customs union, the single market and an open border in Ireland, the attack on our judges as enemies of the people for interpreting the law, attacks on business who pay the taxes and employ people, attacks on our civil servants who worked day and night to deliver the instructions of their political masters, and dare I say it, Mr. Speaker, attacks on you for allowing us in this chamber to have our say on important matters. What really drove me mad was the attempt by some people in this House to own the result of the referendum, to say, to echo the words of the Honourable Member of Birmingham Yardley, my way or the highway, and in the process to trash every single institution that they purported to be campaigning for when they campaigned for Brexit. It is utterly shameful, and I hope that they realise that everyone in this House has done their best to deliver on the referendum result. It's not our fault that there was a hung Parliament. We can blame various people for the reason that we came back with a hung Parliament. No, I blame the politicians. I blame the person who was leading our party at the last election, when we could have come back with a majority, and this party could perhaps reflect on how long it took to react. But nobody knows how this election will turn out. I have simply taken a consistent position as I've watched this carnage and wreckage and this racking up of the rhetoric to traitor and treason, to say we should respect the referendum result, but we should leave with a deal. Mr. Speaker, I don't know if you and I will ever meet again in our respective positions. So I simply want to say to you, as one man of average height, to echo the Honourable Member for Rayleigh, to take that on as a man of average height but substantial girth, thank you for everything you've done to stand up for the rights of this chamber, and thank you as well to all my colleagues who I look forward to seeing on the election beat, reasonably exchanging sensible and intelligent views on the best way forward. I hope you don't mind if I take one small intervention, Mr. Speaker.
It will be a small intervention, Mr. Speaker. I don't wholly agree with my honourable friend, but I think this place would be poorer if he weren't a member of a future Parliament. And I hope that he gets the whip back and we can hear more brilliant speeches about the science and all the other things he's championed in this place. Well,
I'm very grateful, and the Honourable Member for Poole has been a wonderful colleague to me over many, many years. And this place, at its best, is one of the best places to be, and at its worst, it's absolutely awful. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I appreciate the honourable gentleman's very kind and gracious remarks, and I won't forget them. I'm afraid, in order to accommodate remaining colleagues who were on the list, I'm going to have to introduce a 3-minute time limit with immediate effect, because otherwise people won't get in. I can't help it. But there is injury time, as the honourable lady knows. Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, I will not be supporting a general election because I don't think a general election will resolve Brexit. And the clue is partly in the name. A general election is about general issues. It is impossible to extrapolate from the results what people think about a very specific issue, in this case, Brexit. If you want a specific answer on Brexit, then you have to ask a specific question, and the best way of doing that is through a people's vote. That is even more the case, Mr. Speaker, with an electoral system that is as undemocratic and antiquated as our own, because first past the post regularly delivers majority governments on a minority of votes. 1 million people did not march through the streets of London a few weeks ago demanding a general election. They wanted a people's vote because they know that is the best way, indeed the only way, to get to the bottom of this crisis and to resolve it. All that a general election is going to do, quite frankly, is to put Nigel Farage and the Prime Minister back in their comfort zones, basically giving them a stage, political insiders dressed up as rebels, whose agenda, frankly, is chaos so that division will thrive. And I want to take straight on this idea that this is a parliament which has run its course. The Prime Minister has won both his Queen's speech and the second reading of the withdrawal bill. The only person who is blocking progress in this Parliament is the Prime Minister himself.
Absolutely right.
The reason for that is very clear. He has an agenda that is all about a general election, about installing an even harder vote leave contingent of MPs in Parliament. But let us not allow him to get away with telling us as Parliament that somehow we have not been doing a good job at holding him to account. This is not a zombie Parliament. This is a Parliament that has got its head around parliamentary procedures in a way that it's going to take months for any new Parliament to do. And it's precisely because we've been able to keep that Prime Minister in his box that he's not very happy with the fact that we are trying to continue our way forward. But I want to say as well, one of the reasons that I do not want a general election right now is because if we were to have a general election, the thing that should be front and centre of it is the climate emergency. That is what we should be debating in a general election, not having it overshadowed by yet more fights about Brexit, which it will not resolve. We know that the next 18 months are going to be crucial in terms of whether we have a chance of getting off the collision course we're on with climate catastrophe. The Committee on Climate Change themselves said in their report to Parliament just a few months ago that the next Parliament will be absolutely vital. So it is crucial that the next general election is about the climate crisis. This is an existential crisis facing all of us. And if we fritter that away with more debates about Brexit, which is not even going to resolve, we will be responsible for the greatest irresponsibility. That doesn't make quite sense, but you know what I mean. The greatest betrayal of young people, of their futures, because this is a massive wasted opportunity, and I can't bear the fact that we're going to spend it talking about Brexit in a way that is not going to resolve it.
Thank you. Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I made clear earlier, Mr. Speaker, it's my view that there are a number of issues around any general election taking place related to the franchise, the conduct, the security of those elections. We don't have time to go into all those issues, and so I want to concentrate particularly on the issue that I've laid 2 amendments down on, which is the issue of votes at 16. There are a variety of ways in which I think this can be done, Mr. Speaker, without any particular impediments, and wait to see the selections that are made for the committee stage. But my view is that at the very least, the 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, and 18-year-olds who are already obviously on the register should be able to vote. This is a step we've taken place in Wales and in Scotland. In my view, those who have the greatest stake in the future of our country, our young people, should be able to vote in this important general election, as they should indeed in referenda and local elections and other matters. And I want to pay tribute to the work of my colleague, the member for, I believe, West Lothian, and also the colleague for Oldham, who've pursued this this issue, and Hove, who've also pursued this issue strongly in the past. I won't, just because of the time, otherwise I would give way. I know, but I'm conscious of other colleagues. The other issue, Mr Speaker, is that I want to pay tribute to all of the organisations, and particularly members of the Youth Parliament, Mr Speaker, who I know have been making their voices very clearly made today, and urging us in Parliament to support this and to be able to debate that crucial amendment. I had members of the Youth Parliament come and visit me in my own constituency in Cardiff South Park just a couple of weeks ago, and they, Mr Speaker, reflect to me the issues that young people want to see being discussed in this election. It's not just Brexit, which I've spoken on many times in the past, and I'm very clear that it will leave our country worse off, less safe and more unstable, and I will continue to oppose it, Mr Speaker, and I will continue to campaign for a people's vote. But it's also all of the other issues that young people in my constituency in Cardiff South Park come to talk to me about, including mental health, including climate change, including public services, including opportunities for young people, including tackling antisocial behaviour and violence and knife crime, and all of the other issues. 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds care just as much about the future of our country as do all the rest of my constituents, and I will continue to stand up for them and all of my constituents, whether young or old, in any election that happens. But I think we need to make it clear that there has to be an opportunity for that younger generation to have the vote in this general election. Thank you.
Drew Hendry.
Speaker, the constituents in my constituency and across Scotland will have their say in a general election over the shambles they've seen unfolding over this Brexit farce. Scotland voted against Brexit, 62% every single council area. This Parliament, this government has ignored the Scottish Government's compromise that was brought forward. It's ignored the Scottish Parliament, where every single party except the Tories voted to avoid this situation. In the SNP, we want to stop Brexit. We want to see the Prime Minister's rotten deal go by the wayside. But more than that, in my constituency, since 2012, we've been enduring the scandal of the universal credit rollout and into full service, which has brought misery to my constituents. We've seen food banks go from one in the city to every quarter of the city, bringing misery. My honourable friend has brought forward the issue about the rate clause on universal credit. And through 3 Prime Ministers in this place, I've urged them to listen to the MND Association, Marie Curie, Macmillan and patients and doctors and clinicians to get rid of the 6-month rule for the terminally ill over universal credit, to allow implicit consent, and yet it's been ignored at every single stage. They deserve their say on the failings of this government. And what has this government got to fear from votes at 16? What have they got to fear from 16-year-olds? They are about to inherit the farce that this place is laying down for them. Their EU nationals are also vital. In the Highlands, they're vital for their care, they're vital for health services, they're vital to the NHS, in tourism, hospitality and farming. They're absolutely vital. These are our friends, neighbours and colleagues. They should vote, as should 16 and 17-year-olds. Scotland doesn't want a Tory government. It especially doesn't want this Tory government, which has failed my constituency, has failed and is failing Scotland. It can't afford to be ignored anymore. A mandate exists for a referendum on independence for Scotland. We need to be in the position to give our people in Scotland hope for the future. All of them need a choice. Whether it's Boris Island, this broken spectacle of Westminster Little Britain through Brexit, or an independent Scotland taking its own seat at the heart of Europe.
Thank you. Marion Fellows.
Speaker, I don't think I'll even take my 3 minutes. I actually do not fear an election, because I know the people in Motherwell and Wishaw well. I've been talking to them over the last months. And the spirit of those people says that they are looking for independence. They want out of this cracked and broken union. They want rid of this reckless Tory government, and they want the feckless Labour opposition to actually stand up and fight against the Tory austerity, Tory Brexit and Tory mess that they've turned Scotland and the UK into over the last umpteen years. Let's have an election. Let's find out what Scotland really wants. I know, but the rest of the UK should know. Scotland wants and needs independence, and independence soon.
Deirdre Brock.
Speaker, a government under siege from its own side, ignoring the advice of its more thoughtful friends and fearful of a mythical force of ultra-patriots, prepared to do irreparable damage to the UK's international relations by charging ahead with a reckless and ill-considered Brexit, now desperate for an election to turn its huge opinion poll lead into a parliamentary majority. So much for the May government and the election of 2017. That government impaled itself upon its own hubris, Mr. Speaker, and who thought that history would repeat itself so quickly? The thinking of this government has appeared to be, we'll burn that bridge when we come to it, and the blame has always been someone else's. A Prime Minister who bemoans his lack of control of Parliament while disposing of great chunks of his parliamentary party, and who struggles to win any vote in chamber, betrays a lack of leadership, a lack of control, and a lack of statecraft. His premiership is defined now, and no election can save it. This is a make-do-and-mend, hand-me-down government that will limp forlornly from here to its end and pass unlamented into history. The only question left is how much damage it will do as it dies. Now, an election now may not, of course, solve anything for the UK. It may return another deadlocked parliament. There may be a small majority for one party or another, but there may well still be a deadlock in this strange malaise that has so paralysed the English body politic. You lot have no escape, sadly, for the people you represent. But Scotland does. This election will demonstrate how the nations of the UK are diverging and how Scotland is charting a different path. A nation that regards the EU as generally being a force for good. A nation that sees other nations as possible allies rather than probable enemies. A nation that looks outwards instead of up its own fundament. Scotland sits more and more uncomfortably with this place. Now, this election, when it comes, will lay the foundation for the independence that will follow. Scotland will walk a different path, and we will forge a different future. Now, I pity the people of England who are so poorly served by their politicians, but England's people have overthrown broken systems in the past and can do so again. They can cast down the petty tribunes who have so long sat here squabbling over trifles. This should be the last election to a UK Parliament. Scotland will be independent before another is due. We will have no need to die in a ditch. We'll just get independence done without the buffoonery. No one can arrest the progress of a nation or shout down its ambition. This is the sunderance of the UK and the end of a song, and an old song once ended in Scotland will start again. Brexit has been the downfall of 2 Tory Prime Ministers and the decency of the Tory party. It has ripped apart the Labour Party and destroyed what credibility this Parliament once had.
Well said.
Thank you. Geraint Davis.
Mr. Speaker, I'm in favour of a general election on May the 7th, when the sun is shining, when 16-year-olds have been included, when we can get over Brexit by having a referendum on the deal. We've got a deal. The Brexiteers have been arguing for 3 years about what the deal should be. You've got a deal, put it to the people. Why aren't we putting it to the people? Because the Prime Minister knows people won't agree with it. There's a majority in the country on Remain, and he yet knows that he may get a majority of MPs with a small minority of MPs if the Remain vote splits. That isn't democracy, and with his Brexit and any Brexit, we will be poorer, weaker, more divided and isolated. And I very much regret that we're hurtling in this direction, thanks to the Liberal Democrats giving up the public vote and the SNP and the line, and basically having an unstoppable momentum towards an election. We will probably have an election now. The Labour Party will be talking about a better Britain, a fairer Britain, a greener Britain, addressing climate change and not just Brexit, but fundamentally giving that vote back to the people. So we are the party of democracy. Tories will give Brexit at any cost. The Liberals will basically say, Remain whatever you think, and we will provide democracy, a better Britain, and the 4th Prime Minister in 4 years with Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you. Cat Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government is in complete disarray. After yesterday's vote, we now have a Prime Minister who has suffered 10 embarrassing defeats in this House and 2 historic court rulings against him. He has shown his utter incompetence as Prime Minister. The Prime Minister who came to office promising to deliver Brexit by the 31st of October, accompanied by his usual sensationalist language about dying in a ditch that we've come to expect from him. It has been clear for some time that this was never a realistic proposition, and sadly, rather than accepting the reality, fronting up and admitting to making an irresponsible pledge, the Prime Minister instead chose to simply break his promise, costing the taxpayer over £100 million in advertising, not to mention the production and destruction of 10,000 commemorative 50p coins in the process. Things are quite literally in meltdown. To this day, the Prime Minister continues to try and deflect the blame for breaking his word onto anyone he can think of. Mr. Speaker, I would call this the politics of the schoolyard, but quite frankly, at Parkview School, we were better behaved than this. And I believe the vast majority of our children and young people would behave more honourably in similar circumstances. It is clear that a general election is needed because this government has lost the trust of our country, because we know the damage of no-deal Brexit will do to jobs and industries all across this country, and we cannot trust the Prime Minister to be true to his word. We have consistently said that we will support a general election once no deal is absolutely off the table and when the date for the election can be fixed in law. We have now reached that point. I won't give way. Time is very limited. The purpose of a general election is to let the people decide the future of our country. It therefore must be conducted in a way that is accessible to as many people as possible. We will therefore be supporting amendments that achieve this. Students should not be disenfranchised by an election date which will not allow them to vote at their term time address. This is the address where they live for the majority of the year and where they rightly should be able to vote. This is why our preference is for an election on the 9th of December. But we can do better than this, Mr. Speaker. Let us seize this historic opportunity to extend the franchise to some of those most likely to be affected by the outcomes of this general election, namely 16 and 17-year-olds and EU nationals who we already give votes to for all of our elections anyway. We are now in the inconsistent and unsustainable position where 16 and 17-year-olds living in Wales and Scotland can vote in local elections, but their English and Northern Irish counterparts cannot. It is also fundamentally wrong that many millions of EU citizens who live in this country, have their families in this country and contribute to our country and are deeply affected by the developments in this Parliament are currently denied a vote on Westminster elections and the most important general election for a generation. We have accepted the argument that they are affected by the decisions taken at local government elections, which is why we give them the vote here, and there is no sensible reason why they should be denied this right in general elections. The next general election will be a defining moment for our country, as we have suffered almost a decade of relentless Tory cuts which have pushed our public services into crisis. The NHS is in crisis, local schools are starved of funding, and adult social care is on its knees. We need change. Labour will put forward the most radical, hopeful, people-focused programme in modern times, a once-in-a-generation chance to rebuild and transform our country. We will put control of Brexit back in the hands of the people with a real choice between a sensible leave deal or remain. Labour is the only party that can and will let the people decide on Brexit. We will tackle the climate emergency with a Green New Deal, bringing in net zero emissions targets forward, providing renewable industries with the investment and support that they need, including banning fracking in the UK once and for all. It's time for change. Labour will end austerity, build an economy that works for all, with a real living wage, proper collective bargaining and 4 new bank holidays. And I look forward to making these positive arguments to the country in the weeks ahead.
Minister Oliver Dalby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I begin by paying tribute to all members, honourable and right honourable, who have contributed to today's debate and spoken with genuine sincerity and passion. There have been some excellent contributions and a wide range of issues raised. In particular, I'd like to pay tribute to my honourable friends, the members for Isle of Wight, my honourable friend, the member and indeed neighbour, the member for St Albans, my honourable friend, the member for Stowe, and my honourable friend, the member for Sleaford and North Hykeham. Essentially, all of those contributions made the same point. People want to get Brexit done, they want to move on, and the only way we can do that is to ensure that we have a general election mandate to ensure that that happens. In particular, I would like to pay tribute to my honourable friend, and sadly he's not in his place, the member for Wantage, who gave a heartfelt and excellent speech paying tribute to this House. I hope honourable members appreciate there will be further opportunities for discussion during the course of this bill, particularly at committee stage, which follows. So they'll forgive me, I will not go into detail on some of the points which I think will be addressed at that stage. But what we really are facing today is the simplest possible bill, a straightforward piece of legislation to allow a general election on the 12th of December so that we can elect a new Parliament, get Brexit done and allow this country to finally move on. And let me be clear, Mr. Speaker, the government would rather be getting on with a smooth and orderly Brexit now. I give way to the honourable lady.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to the Minister for allowing me to intervene. As part of the Prime Minister's general election campaign, I am presuming that he will make a grand tour of the United Kingdom, including coming to Northern Ireland. So could the Minister just explain what the Prime Minister is going to say to the Unionist community and how he's going to reassure them that their future is safe in his hands? Because at the present time, I can assure the Minister that there are many in the Unionist community who do not feel confident that their future is safe in his hands.
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her contribution. The Prime Minister, I don't know exactly where the Prime Minister will be going on his election tour, but I'm sure he will go to Northern Ireland. He will take the message to Northern Ireland that the deal that he has negotiated will allow the entire United Kingdom to leave the customs union as one, and that that deal will be based on a mechanism of consent. But the challenge we have in getting such a deal through this House is that whenever Parliament has had the opportunity to get Brexit done, it's not taken it, even though 80% of us in this House stood on a mandate to honour the referendum result. Let's look at the record. Look at the record. Parliament voted to extend and delay in March. It voted to extend and delay in April. And through the Benn Act, Parliament forced the Prime Minister again to extend beyond the 31st of October. And most recently, it voted against a timetable which would have allowed us to leave in an orderly manner, on time, on the 31st of October, as we have promised. So, Mr. Speaker, I really do fear that if Parliament has the choice of another delay or an extension beyond the 31st of January, it will surely once again take the opportunity to delay and to extend. And the risk that we face in this House is that we once again, as we tick through to 2020, back in this chamber, discussing Brexit more and more. Brexit done. I will give way to the honourable lady.
I thank the honourable gentleman. I wonder if he can answer me how we will stop the paralysis if what is returned to this House is exactly what we have now.
Well, I've heard the honourable lady make this point repeatedly during the course of the debate. There is a very simple answer to that, which is that people in this country should vote Conservative and vote for a party which will get the deal through and will ensure that we finally leave the European Union as people want us to do. Now, I think I've dealt with the honourable lady's point. I think I've dealt with her point. And, Mr. Speaker, thanks to the efforts of the Prime Minister, we have a deal which we will be putting to the British people at that general election, a deal that we will then seek to deliver through this House on the back of a stable and sustainable parliamentary majority, and one that will finally allow us to leave the European Union, as most of us have promised to do so. I give way.
And I thank him to give way, but surely now the EU withdrawal deal has got beyond second reading. Surely use the time to take it to the next stage and calling this election.
You voted against the programme.
The problem with the argument advanced by the honourable gentleman opposite is that when we had the opportunity in this House to get Brexit done and to get it done by the 31st of October, he and members opposite chose to vote against the programme motion that would have enabled it. And this is the challenge that is facing us, that every time this House has the opportunity to deliver on Brexit, it instead chooses further delay. And that deal that the Prime Minister has reached has confounded critics in this House and elsewhere. People said we'd never be able to reopen the withdrawal agreement. We reopened the withdrawal agreement. He's nailed the naysayers who said that the EU would never let go of the Northern Ireland backstop. We've got rid of the backstop. And when people said we couldn't ensure that the whole of the United Kingdom could leave as a single customs territory, he refused to accept it. And yes, this government has made sure that the UK can leave the customs union as one entire whole, one United Kingdom free to chart its own course. Mr. Speaker, it has been this government's position for some time that if Parliament cannot back the Prime Minister's deal, then we must surely have a general election. But up until today, that has not been the position of the party opposite. We've had the extraordinary spectre of a leader of opposition who spends every day castigating this government's failures. Indeed, his party busily puts out leaflets demanding a general election. But when that golden moment arrives to finally have the general election, what happens? The leader of the opposition has repeatedly spurned it. So I'm glad that finally the leader of the opposition has faced up to the inevitable, has ensured that we will make some progress with this bill. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm confident now that we can make that progress and we can get on and have that general election. And when that general election happens, we will have two contrasting visions for 2020. Because the choice in front of the British people is very clear. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has got a deal that we can ensure that we all deliver on the promises we made in the 2017 manifesto. We finally deliver on Brexit, get the job done, and once we have got the job done, finally, we can turn to the priorities that matter to the British people, the great one nation agenda being advanced by my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, one that will allow us to deliver for our hospitals, deliver for our schools.
Point of order, Mr. Berry, Chairman.
Many excellent speeches were curtailed at 3 minutes this evening. Why is this awful, repetitious performance allowed to go on for so long?
The honourable gentleman has 2.5 minutes in which to develop his peroration. But meanwhile, the honourable gentleman has registered his disapproval. Minister.
I thank Mr. Speaker, you for that opportunity. I think I will be able to in slightly shorter order, so I hope I can bring pleasure to the member opposite. But in that election, we will deliver on a one-nation agenda, delivering for our schools, our hospitals, safer communities, more police, massive investment in our infrastructure, keeping our streets safe, tackling the cost of living. And what will be the alternative? That nightmare, the nightmare advanced by the Leader of the Opposition, who wants to make 2020 the year of 2 referendums, one on Brexit and one on another Scottish independence referendum. More energy-sapping, mind-numbing stagnation, more pointless delay. So I urge honourable and right honourable members to back this bill, back the general election, and let the government get Brexit done and allow the country to move on.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye! Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Under the order of the House of today, we shall, well, it says here now, for which I may have to substitute the word shortly, move to committee of the whole House. And I say that as much for the benefit of people outside of the elected chamber as for anybody else, because I have collected the voices, as the Speaker is required to do, and it is clear that there is an overwhelming majority in support of the second reading. From the second reading, we proceed to committee. When the House sits in committee, the Speaker does not occupy the chair. That responsibility is taken by an other, who will be wending his or her way to the chamber as I speak, and I say that with some confidence another chair will arrive ere long to take up his or her important duties. A point of order, Alison McGovern. I'm deeply grateful to the honourable lady who may be indulged at slightly greater length than would otherwise be the case. Point of order, Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This has been a fractious, challenging, and difficult debate at times. We are discussing a general election, and would you agree with me, Mr. Speaker, that in the context of this debate, it is extraordinarily important that all members of this House agree that their behaviour, whether it's in this House or in the potential future general election that may be to come, that we all make sure that our behaviour, whatever others do, is exemplary.
Good point. I agree with that. And on the matter of exemplary behaviour, we can all learn from the honourable lady. I know she did not seek that tribute, but I proffer it gratis in any case, because it has the advantage of being justified. I'm extremely grateful to the Chairman of Ways and Means. Under the order of the House of today, we shall now move to Committee of the Whole House. Order.
We just need to do the
Okay, he's still doing it.
Yep.
Order.
Early Parliamentary General Election Bill.
We begin with Amendment 2 to Clause 1. I will call Cat Smith to move Amendment 2, with which it will be convenient to consider Government Amendment 14, Clause 1 Stand Part, Clause 2 Stand Part and Amendment 3. I call Cat Smith to move Amendment 2.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister came into office promising to deliver Brexit by October the 31st, and he has failed. He has shown his utter incompetence and simply cannot be trusted. We have consistently said that we will support a general election once no deal is absolutely off the table and when the date for a general election can be fixed in law. After lengthy denial by the Prime Minister, we have now reached that point, which is why the time is right for a Labour government and real change. The purpose of any general election is to allow the largest possible number of people to participate and have the say on the future of the country. There are currently up to 9.5 million people in Great Britain who are not currently registered to vote correctly, and young people are less likely to be registered, with almost one-third of young people aged 18 to 34 missing off the electoral roll, and this means that their views and interests are being underrepresented. The government know that when lots of people are registered to vote, they are less likely to do well in elections, which is why the government has done nothing to tackle this issue. The Prime Minister even tried to fix the date of a general election in October to make it harder for students to take part. Students must not be disenfranchised by an election date which will not allow them to vote in their term time address. This is the address where they'll be living for the majority of the year and where they rightly should be able to vote. Labour's amendment to fix the date of the general election for the 9th of December is the best possible way of ensuring the next general election is accessible. But we can do better than this, which is why we would have supported, had it been selected, the amendments to extend the franchise to 16 and 17-year-olds and EU citizens with settled status, because we recognise their contributions to our society and they should have the right to vote on our future as well. So whatever date the House decides the election will be, the Labour Party is ready to get rid of this Tory government that has pushed our public services into crisis, and we are ready to put forward our vision for a different kind of country, a country where people get the care they need and from a properly funded NHS, a country where everyone, regardless of their family background, gets the education they need to do well in life, a country where regions that have been held back get the investment they need and a chance to rebuild after a decade of neglect, a country where homelessness is a thing of the past and everyone can have access to safe, affordable housing, a country that is led by a Prime Minister that puts the control of Brexit back in the hands of people in a new referendum with a real choice between a Leave deal and Remain. Labour is the only party that can and will let the people decide on Brexit. This is a once-in-a-generation chance to rebuild and transform our country, which is why I urge this House to support this amendment to ensure that this election is accessible as possible.
Oliver Dowden.
Thank you.
Clause 1 be made, Oliver Dowden.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak at committee stage on this crucial bill. As I said in the closing remarks at second reading, this is a short, sensible bill setting out the date of the next general election. The bill provides transparency on the date of the election, ensures it can be conducted in a timely way so that Parliament can meet in good time ahead of the 31st of January deadline. The first clause of the bill provides for a parliamentary general election to be held on the 12th of December 2019. I will shortly set out the reasons why this is the preferred date and why the government will be resisting the amendment in the name of the opposition. The second clause provides that the bill will come into force on the day it is passed and deals with its short title. Mr Deputy Speaker, I just want to briefly touch on the sub-clauses in Clause 1, just to reassure members of this House. These are minor technical points. The first sub-clause removes the requirement for ministers to review the welfare cap in the current Parliament, and the second sub-clause ensures that the reporting requirement placed on ministers does not need to be completed in this Parliament. So both sub-clauses essentially ensure that these requirements will align with the new parliamentary session following the election. So on the principal amendment in the name of the opposition in relation to the date, we have considered the date of the poll, and I want to set out why the 12th of December is the best date for two reasons. First of all, it gives Parliament enough time to progress essential business, and specifically the Northern Ireland Budget Bill. This bill is necessary to access the funding the Northern Ireland Civil Service needs after the 31st of October. If the bill does not receive royal assent, it would put at risk the delivery of public services and proper governance in Northern Ireland. Yes, I will.
But wouldn't that very issue be resolved by sitting this Friday, for example?
Yes. Well, I think it would be helpful for this House to consider the bill in good order. This is an important measure to ensure that nurses, teachers, police officers in Northern Ireland actually get paid. And if we don't pass this piece of legislation, there is a real danger that such people will not get paid. And I would urge honourable members to think carefully if they move the date. And the issue at hand here is to move the date to the 9th, and that would in turn preclude us from doing that. Yes, I will give way to the...
Did my honourable friend note that the opposition spokesperson's principal reason for having the 9th and not the 12th was because they felt that students would somehow miss out? Students are perfectly able to apply for a postal vote or a proxy vote, and 3 days will make absolutely no difference to that process.
Yes, my honourable friend and neighbour, the member for St Albans, raises a very important point. Really, there is no substance to this point about students being disenfranchised. First of all, 70% of students choose to vote at their home address, so it would not apply to them. And secondly, of the top 40 largest universities, all of them will be sitting on the 12th. So I don't believe that there's any danger of disenfranchising that point. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Extremely grateful. I remember last Thursday hearing the leader of the Scottish National Party saying that we couldn't have it on the 12th because it would be cold, it would be dark and it would be wet. Has my honourable friend been in touch with the Meteorological Office to find out how much warmer, how much lighter it will be 3 days earlier on the 9th?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. I stand ready to be corrected, but I looked at this point. I believe having it those 3 days early would allow 1 whole minute of extra daylight. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
It doesn't matter in the Humber whether it's the 9th or the 12th. I can guarantee it'll be a bit windy and probably a bit damp. But, more importantly, will he just dismiss the opposition's amendment for what it is, which is a pretty shameful attempt to divide? That's what it's about. They're trying to build a resentment in a group of the electorate that they think is susceptible to their message on this. And it's a disgraceful and shameful thing to try to separate students off from the rest of the population, when in actual fact everybody knows you can vote by post, by proxy, in every single election. This is a shameful attempt, and they'll do it throughout the election campaign. Divide, 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 because that's what they do.
As ever, my honourable friend is entirely correct. As I said, there is not going to be an impact on the enfranchisement of students. All students will have the opportunity to vote. Most vote at home. Most universities will still be sitting. And the other reason, and perhaps if honourable members will allow me to elucidate on this point, it may satisfy them. The other reason for ensuring that we have the election on the 12th is that we have it on the Thursday. Thursday is by convention the day on which we have such elections in this country. There doesn't seem to be a strong argument to the contrary to move it those days early, and I will give way to the honourable gentleman if he wishes to bring forward one.
I should also point out to the Minister that there is no convention to have elections every 2 years, but we seem to be content to do that. Can I just take him back to his points on the Northern Ireland budget bill, because those are important points, and of course we all want to see people get paid. We don't want a kind of Republican-style shutdown of government in Northern Ireland. So can he answer the question I asked him? Can we not resolve this by sitting this Friday?
Well, I would say again to the honourable gentleman 3 points. First of which is Thursday is the usual date, so why change it? I have yet to hear an argument advanced to change it to that. Essentially, the honourable gentleman is making a case to change it from Thursday to Monday. Secondly, we need to have time to properly consider this bill. And thirdly, if honourable members wish to move the date to that earlier date, they need to come up with a compelling reason to do so, which I've yet to hear, other than daylight. So there are principled. I think I've dealt with this point. There are principled. There are.
Order. We can't have everybody on the feet at the same time. If the Minister gives way, by all means, Minister.
I will make some progress, and then I will consider giving way to the honourable gentleman opposite. So there are principled reasons as to why we wish to have proper scrutiny of legislation for the Northern Ireland budget. It's essential for teachers and doctors and nurses in Northern Ireland to be paid. There is a convention that elections are held on Thursdays, and the party opposite once again is trying to move the goalposts on this. Initially, the argument was they did not want a general election on the 12th of December because they were concerned that this government would somehow seek to ram through the bill giving effect to the Prime Minister's deal. Yesterday, the Prime Minister at the dispatch box gave that assurance, and now they're seeking to contrive another reason to artificially create divisions in this House over moving the date by 3 days. I say to honourable members, we've had 3 years to consider this bill. Does 3 days really make that much difference? And I think this is in tune with a wider point. The public are getting more and more frustrated at this House endlessly coming up with reasons, procedural reasons, which prevent us getting on and doing the thing we want to do, which is set out in this bill, which is to have the general election and to allow us to resolve this issue. So we will therefore be resisting the amendment in the name of the opposition to move the date of the general election. I give way.
Well, it's just a technical question in a way, really. If the general election is on the 12th of December, when will the new Parliament sit and when will the Queen's speech be? Because when this was last done in 1923-1924, with the general election on the 6th of December, the Queen's speech wasn't until the 15th of January, which would make it difficult to get any serious business done by the end of January.
Well, I hope I can reassure the honourable gentleman. The reason why the government wishes to have a general election is to ensure that we have a sustainable majority to pass the bill that implements the Prime Minister's withdrawal agreement, and therefore the impetus on us is to get that done as quickly as possible. So I don't think you will find delays from this side of the House. I would also briefly like to touch upon the amendment which stands in my name. Now, the Scottish National Party have raised the concern which the amendment seeks to address. Now, their concern was to ensure that the registration deadline in Scotland for the 12th of December election was the same as for the rest of the country. The government supports the intention of the SNP amendment in relation to this election to ensure that we have across UK approach to the registration deadline. This will allow a comprehensive UK-wide communication campaign by the Electoral Commission to advertise the deadline and to ensure that those who want to register are able to do so in a timely manner. The government's amendment would achieve the consistency in registration deadlines the honourable member and his party desired without any longer-term unintended consequences. Yes, I give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I think it's clear that the contentious area in this part of the discussion is about whether it's going to be the 9th or the 12th. And Number 10 had previously suggested that they're willing to pull the bill if the amendments regarding EU nationals and 16 and 17-year-olds have been selected and passed. So my question to the Minister is this. Is the government willing to die in a ditch over whether or not this is the 9th or the 12th? What is their intention if this amendment passes?
Well, I believe I've set out two sensible and compelling reasons to have the date on the 12th, and I have yet to hear, to the contrary, an argument why we need to move it by 3 days. I really think we have dealt with this point. I know other honourable members wish to speak, so if the House will forgive me, I will just conclude my points on the amendment that stands in my name. So the government's amendment removes St Andrew's Day 2019 only from the operation of Regulation 29.4 and 8.3 of the Scottish regulations. This both restricts the change to this election only and leaves the subsequent register intact. The effect of the amendment is to remove a bank holiday from the calculation of time for the registering for the voter deadline. It would instead be classed as a normal working day, but for this election only. We feel that the amendment, as we have drafted it, will, I hope, address SNB concerns, but will limit any unintended consequences of amending the relevant provision of the Representation of People regulations. So I think, in summary, honourable members, we are trying to achieve a straightforward, simple piece of legislation which ensures that we can have a general election in short order. And I would urge all honourable members to resist the temptation to complicate and amend this, to allow us to have the general election on the 12th of December so that we can get a sustainable majority, so we can deliver the Prime Minister's deal and we can finally move on.
Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Chair. I want to make some comments generally on the bill as a whole and then to discuss the individual amendments that have been selected. I have to start by saying that it's clearly not ideal to have an election a couple of weeks before Christmas for anyone. The nights are fair drawing in. It will be cold and it will be dark, and many of the people in this country will be prepared, quite understandably, in looking forward to Christmas and spending time with their family and relatives. So it's hardly an ideal time. But from our perspective in the SNP, we think this is a necessary requirement now, because we have reached a situation of impasse in this Parliament where it is incapable of resolving probably the biggest political issue that has divided the United Kingdom in my lifetime. There are competing views as to what the end point of the Brexit process should be. And parliamentary democracy in this country, it seems to me, has now reached a point of stasis where it is incapable of adjudicating between those outcomes. It is therefore right and proper, in my view, that we should go back to the electorate and allow them to reflect on what can happen. So this will be very much the Brexit election. And I am very pleased that we have moved the government from the position that it had a few weeks ago, where it didn't actually want a Brexit election. Yes. It didn't want a Brexit election where the people be allowed to cast their views about different outcomes. It wanted to get Brexit done and then go to the electorate afterwards. And that would have been a travesty, Mr Hoyle, because what that would have said to people is, we're going to have a general election. Brexit will be one of the big topics of conversation, but there's really no point you expressing a view because we're going to conclude the matter before the first ballot is cast. That would have been a ridiculous anti-democratic situation, and I'm glad that we have got the Prime Minister and the government away from that, even if it does mean he might be looking for a ditch on Thursday. Now, the reason why many people have said, lamented the fact that 3.5 years on, Parliament hasn't resolved this matter. In my view, that's simply because it is without any reasonable resolution, because the promise of Brexit has turned out to be a lie. People were told in 2016 that they could vote to leave the European Union and they would be better off as a result. That is not true. And hardly anyone in this chamber would now argue that that was true. In fact, it is a matter of how bad the different options are in terms of Brexit going ahead. And that is why, quite understandably, now there is a large body of opinion in this country for whom the conclusion of this process should be to say, that's it, it's gone far enough, stop it now, we want to get off. And I think an election will allow that view to come to the fore and for people to do it. The election will also allow the Prime Minister to put his particular deal before the electorate. Because be under no illusions, what the Prime Minister has done is he has taken an extremely flawed deal that was come up by his predecessor, and he has made it immeasurably worse. This is a proposal, a series of proposals that the Prime Minister has agreed with the European Union that will impoverish people in this country, that will remove the standing of the United Kingdom very much in the eyes of the world and leave it a much worse place. I don't want that for the people of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and I certainly don't want that outcome for the people of Scotland. And that is why it is right and proper that the Prime Minister should put his case before the electorate. And I look forward to the Prime Minister being challenged, not just by opposition parties, but by Nigel Farage as well, to see whether or not the deal that he's come up with satisfies the real hard-right Brexiteers for whom nothing will sate their appetite. Now, the situation in Scotland, of course, Chair, as many people have remarked, is quite different. 62% of the people of Scotland didn't vote for this mess, and that 62%, by the way, once we exclude most teenage voters at the time and most people who were born elsewhere in the European Union. Had they been allowed to take part in that decision, the figure would have been far higher still. And if the decision were asked again today, it would be far higher still. And it is my responsibility here to represent the people who elected me. So happily take an intervention.
Thank him for giving way on the issue of votes for 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds. I believe that all men and women are born equal, and in this place everybody should be equal. And the amendment, which fortunately was not picked today, would have given 16 and 17-year-olds in Scotland and in Wales the vote. But
order! You're out of order. It is not debatable. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I'm confused as to why that particular intervention should be made at this point in what I was saying, but I will come on to mention that when I consider the amendments that are before us. But I want to say for now that I think it was the honourable member for Birmingham Yardley who said that, well, what could happen in the outcome of elections is we get another hung parliament without a majority one way or the other. That, of course, is true. But an election will allow all of us the opportunity to refresh a mandate. Because I, for one, believe there are far too many people in this Parliament who are imprisoned by an out-of-date mandate from 2017, which is against what they would want to do now, having considered the matter. And it will give colleagues, particularly in Her Majesty's opposition, particularly in seats where a majority voted to leave the European Union, the opportunity to go there and argue, if they so wish, for a rethink and for this matter to be put back to the public before any final decision is taken. That mandate is not present at this Parliament. That mandate could be present in a new Parliament, and that is one of the reasons why I think an election would be welcome as well. I will, but I'm anxious of time.
On the question of the mandate, if we look at the 2016 referendum, it is a fact that in that referendum, electoral offences were committed by vote leave. The campaign, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor of the Duchess of Lancaster and their Chief Advisor were actually involved in. Isn't this general election an opportunity to highlight their role and for a new government to investigate their role properly, something which has not been done under this government?
Indeed, I mean, there would be the opportunity to do that, and I think those transgressions should be investigated, and I do think they undermine the result of the 2016 referendum. Yet another reason why I think the electorate should be allowed to look at this matter again. But on the question of mandates, I also want to be very clear, Chair, that when it comes to mandates in Scotland, we will be fighting this general election for 3 objectives. 1 will be to stop Brexit, not to rubber stamp it. 2 will be to get rid of the most right-wing Tory government in my lifetime. And 3 will be to demand that people in Scotland have got the right to choose an alternative future, an alternative path of doing things, and should not be dragged along against their will. And we will put that case to the people in Scotland, and if we win that mandate, and if we win that election, then I demand that other people in this chamber respect that decision and do not stand in the way of the people of Scotland when they next seek the opportunity to determine their own method of governance. Chair, if I could just turn in closing to the amendments. I do regret, and I won't discuss them because I know they haven't been selected, but I'd simply to say I think it's a matter of regret that we are not able, at this time of political crisis where we are discussing how to get out of it, we're not able to seize the opportunity to extend our franchise and allow 2 very important groups of people in our community who have a vested interest more than we do in the outcome of this decision, allow them the opportunity to participate. So I regret very... Okay.
On the point of voting age, I just wonder if the honourable member appreciates, I'm sure he does, that of the 16, 17-year-olds who were 16 or who were 17-year-old in 2016 were 18-year-old and of voting age in 2017, when 56% of voters in Scotland voted for either the Conservative Party or Labour, who at the time, at least in the case of Labour, were committed to delivering on Brexit.
I'm unclear that that's an argument against 16 to 17-year-olds being able to vote in this election or indeed on any subsequent election. As a principle,
clutching at straws. Well, gentleman, for giving way, and to say I entirely concur with his points, and indeed this is the point I made more widely in the second reading debate. I do think it's a shame. Obviously, we're not able to discuss amendments that haven't been selected, but I do concur entirely with the point he's making.
Thank you very much. I think there is a broad level of agreement actually across the House, including the odd one over on that side of the chamber as well, who would agree that the time has surely come to extend the franchise. And I would hope that we don't end up in a situation where we have a general election in December and it lasts for another 5 years before we can even consider this possible enfranchisement. So it would have been a timely opportunity to seize, but we've chosen not to do so. Chair, the amendments that have been selected, let me just say that we are very much in favour of the amendment which suggests the date should move to the 9th of December, and we shall be voting for that tonight. I don't understand. The government said it wanted an election as soon as possible, so why would it not wish to have it 3 days earlier than the date? I think I've taken enough in fairness. I need to conclude. No, thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you. Which part of no don't you understand? It does bring a number of benefits in terms of the ability of many of the electorate to be able to participate in the election. It does put an extra little bit of distance between the election and Christmas, and it does not inconvenience our ability to conclude our business in this Parliament in any way. It could be done. We could get our business finished on prorogue at the end of this week. So it's entirely doable, and I do not understand why the government, who have been so determined that there must be an election as soon as possible, would be so resistant to doing that for 3 days earlier. I say let's do it as soon as possible in order to get this lot out as soon as possible. And finally, Chair, just on the amendment in the name of the Minister, just to thank the Government, uncharacteristically, for introducing this technical amendment, which I hope the House will support, which simply eradicates a current disadvantage there would be in the electoral registration process in Scotland, occasioned by the fact that we have a bank holiday on St Andrew's Day, the 30th of November. I hope the House will pass that and put us all on a level playing field. And with that, I shall conclude my remarks and look forward to the general election to come.
So you go, sir.
Senator, I'm very much on the last point on the 30th of November should declare an interest. It being St Andrew's Day, it's also the day of my 60th birthday. But by the 30th of November, I shall no longer be a Member of Parliament because I am not standing at the forthcoming election. And I will have been here since 2001, and I have to say the last few years in this Parliament, I don't think been Parliament at its best. In fact, it would be difficult to find a rare statement made by any one of us over the past 2 years. It's been like Groundhog Day every day, and I think the public are getting extremely fed up with our behaviour. In fact, I've never known such a disconnect between the body politic and the public. And I really do believe that any device or attempt to frustrate the public in having a general election now will be viewed extremely badly by the public, who are, as I say, extremely fed up with our behaviour. And I would just say, I understand, we all understand, why the Scottish Nationalist Party want to have, the SNP want to have an election, because they know, as we all do, in January, there is a court case about to start, which will lay bare the divisions between those who support Alex Salmond and those who support Nicola Sturgeon. And they know that if the election is delayed until next year, they will suffer at the polls. But I really do think it's strange for a party which prides itself on looking after one of the devolved parts of the United Kingdom to play party politics with Northern Ireland. And all I was saying, the Honourable Lady laughs in rather a tinny way. Exactly. But no, I won't give way. No, I won't give way. But no, I won't give way. But as a former Minister of State, I don't believe the Honourable Gentleman was a former Minister. As a former Minister of State in Northern Ireland, I care passionately about Northern Ireland. And I am concerned, I would say, about some aspects of the proposed legislation and how it affects Northern Ireland. But that having been said, it is my understanding that if the date of the election is brought forward, that will prevent much of the legislation we need in terms of empowering the civil service in Northern Ireland to do their job. So I would just say to the Scottish Nats, why is it that you are prepared to play politics? To what end? With the people of Northern Ireland. If you care about Northern Ireland, or perhaps you wish to cast them to one side. I think it's very clear in the legislation. I'm extremely glad and pleased and relieved that some of the amendments proposed, some of the wrecking amendments proposed today, such as giving Europeans the right, EU nationals the right to vote in British elections. I would ask again, where can British citizens vote in the EU in national elections? The answer is nowhere. And this sudden discovery that votes should be given to 16-year-olds as a matter of course everybody realises that cannot be done with the timetable available. It's another wrecking amendment.
Where you should be speaking. Have you finished? So you go. I've got others waiting.
I would just say, the British people are watching our deliberations this evening. They want an election. They understand the date for the election is partially informed by the desire to have good governance and good government towards the people of Northern Ireland, and it's worth remembering that the institutions are not up and running there. It would be foolhardy to bring the election forward by a matter of days in order to frustrate that, and therefore I think that amendment should be resisted.
That's it.
my intervention was somewhat long, I thought I would make a speech in this debate and just make a small contribution. And I want to start by saying I absolutely welcome the fact we're going to have a general election. It is a sadness in a way that this Parliament hasn't been able to run its full term, particularly given the last one only ran for 2 years as well. And the reason that this Parliament hasn't been able to run its full term is because of the fact that people in this place did not do what they said they were going to do, very sadly, in the 2017 election, and that is to honour the referendum result. And we heard some of that this afternoon by some of the contributions already in this debate. What has gone on since that election in 2017? Upon which the overwhelming majority of us were re-elected to deliver Brexit, and I accept the SNP had a different position on that, and they have consistently followed the line that they took in the general election. But that's not the case for most of the rest of us. And what has happened is we have seen this belittling and talking down of the referendum result and people who dared to vote to leave the European Union. And we heard some of that again today. And indeed, the contribution of the SNP spokesman, I think, on this matter, certainly the member for Edinburgh East, was to do the same, which was to imply that Brexiteers and people who voted for leave didn't really know what they were voting for. Now, I'm in the middle of just 1 second, let me finish my point, and I will give it to the gentleman. And actually, we've seen this consistently throughout, where people who didn't vote for Brexit, who were on the other side of the debate, consistently tell Brexit voters what it is that we voted for, and they think they have the right to interpret what...
Order. No. It's not a debate about Brexit. It's about the clause. And what you're trying to do is, unfortunately, is widen the debate from where we are. We are on the clause. Have you now finished? Andrew Percy, well, right, let's stick to where we were.
Responding to a speech that was made in the chamber, directly to a point that was made, Mr Deputy Speaker. I will give way to the gentleman. I'll give way to him.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way, because I want to just clarify this on the record. At no time have any of us ever said people did not know what they were voting for in 2016 in the Brexit referendum. What we do say is that they were willfully lied to in that campaign.
Exactly the point, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that it is that people who went and voted Remain, they knew full well what they were doing. No, I'm not giving way to the Honourable Lady. But of course, Brexit voters were misled, they were a bit daft, they were lied to, and uniquely they couldn't see through it. And we saw it, and if anybody wants to talk about promises, I will do in a moment, If anybody wants to talk about promises in a referendum campaign, about whether people will be poorer or richer after a referendum, then I'm afraid we'll take no lectures from the SNP on this matter. I will give way to the gentleman.
Thank my refrain for giving way. We hear what we believe to be the voice of Scotland. They are the voice of some of Scotland. And the fact that they don't often say is that in 2016, in 2016, there was more people voted in Scotland to leave the European Union than voted for the SNP at the general election in 2017. And that's a fact. There's a lot of people voted to leave the European Union from Scotland.
Indeed, I mean, that's absolutely true. But as I said, Mr Deputy Speaker, at least in fairness to the SNP, their position on wanting to cancel Brexit is a consistent one that they stood on in the 2017 general election. But we heard it also from the contribution of the honourable gentleman for Wrexham when he intervened, which was again to suggest that there was some sort of fiddling in favour of leave. And this is why this Parliament is so broken. This is why this Parliament... No, I'm not giving way, because I haven't finished my point. And again, all I would say to the honourable gentleman, that after the 2015 election, his party was fined for election expense failings. I think over the Edstone, as it was called. Momentum received the biggest fine any political group has received in the UK. I don't question the honourable gentleman's mandate from either the 2015 election or from 2017, because his party was responsible in one election for technical breaches when it came to expense law, or in the case of the 2017 election, because one of the groups within his party were... I will give way to him, yes.
Thank you. These were not technical breaches. This was collusion between to break electoral spending limits, and collusion in which the Prime Minister, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, and Dominic Cummings were involved. Now, that is important. I voted for Article 50, and I was misled by a campaign that I found out about after I voted for Article 50. I take it seriously. Clearly he doesn't. I believe in keeping the law.
OK, well, I mean, I'm sorry, but the Honourable Gentleman has done nothing to deliver on his 2017 election since that vote, which was to deliver Brexit. And that's a prime example of why this Parliament is so broken, because it is, never mind the £1 million that was funnelled to different Remain groups in the run-up to the end of that referendum. Never mind the taxpayers' money, millions of pounds of taxpayers' money, not yet, millions of pounds of taxpayers' money used to campaign for Remain. Never mind all of the institutions of the state that were used to try to...
I think you need. I'm just going to deal with the point myself first, and I'll come to that. We are not broadening this debate. I have asked you. There are others wishing to speak. We're getting bogged down on something that's not relevant to the clause. You have answered the question at least 5 times already. My view is I would love to hear Mr Tomlinson, who's next to you. He's desperate to get in. Andrew Percy.
Mr Deputy, we've got 2 hours for this debate, so I hope we will get to hear other members as well.
You're a former member of the Speaker's panel. You know exactly what I'm relating this to is to the clause. We've allowed a little movement away from that. Now, I want you to speak to the clause. If not, there are other members. Mr Andrew Percy.
Well, Mr Deputy, I'm responding to points that were made in other speeches and interventions in this debate. But I will, of course, because... the front bench opposite need to calm themselves a little bit. I know they're not looking forward to an election because they broke their promises from the 2017 election, but they do need to calm themselves. I will, of course, Mr Deputy Speaker, follow your ruling, because you did do me the honour of putting me on the Speaker's panel after all. But the reason this Parliament is entirely broken is precisely because of that very reason, in that the votes of the majority of this country, 17.4 million people in 2016, have not been respected, and that is why we have to get to this election. I'll give way to my gentleman.
Grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. He says Parliament is broken. It's not just broken. This Parliament is dead as a dodo. This Parliament cannot do anything. It's constant dither and delay. The public want us to get on and deliver. And a general election, this clause allows us to do that.
Hear, hear. My honourable friend is entirely right. That's why we have to absolutely bring this Parliament to a close. And in terms of the amendment as to whether it's the 9th or the 12th, well, I'm not particularly bothered. I just want my constituents and the people in the constituencies around me who have been let down, I'm afraid to say, by their members of Parliament who haven't kept their promises from the 2017 election, where all of the constituencies around me voted by a huge margin to leave the European Union. I want them to have that say for exactly the reason that the honourable gentleman has stated, because this Parliament has not kept its promises to the people. So whether it's the 9th or the 12th, I'm not especially bothered. All I would say is that if we're worried about voters being confused about an election or being unable to vote, then I think changing the day of the election is one of those ways in which people could potentially be confused, because we've always voted, I don't know for how long, but certainly in my short number of years on this planet, on a Thursday. That is when we normally vote. So a change of the date, I think, could be confusing. If we have to vote on the 9th, so be it. But the 12th should be the day on which we vote, because that is the day we normally vote. And I just want to... No, I'm not going to give any more. I just want to say one final thing. I just want to say one final point in terms of the tone of this forthcoming election as well, because that is going to be important. And we've heard a lot of attacks on the Prime Minister in the last few days in this chamber, and there was an analysis out today saying the person who's been on the receiving end of the largest amount of bile and personal attacks has in fact been the Prime Minister. And we will see more of that in this election campaign. The 2017 election campaign was the worst election I have ever been involved in when it comes to behaviour, and I fought 8 election campaigns in my short life, and the 2017 election was the very worst. And as the Leader of the Opposition is here, I hope that he will reflect on the words he uses in this election, because what happened at the last election was, in his name, my staff were spat at, in his name. I was attacked in the street by people chanting his name at me on his behalf because of the divisive language he has consistently used before that election in the run to it. So I will take him at his word. I take him at his word this election. That he will encourage his supporters and party members to engage in better behaviour, because the 2017 election was an appalling campaign for many of us to go through, and the abuse and threats and damage to property, damage to constituents' property, perpetrated in some cases by people in the name of the Leader of the Opposition. So I hope the campaign next time in December is a more civil campaign on all sides, because this is not a matter that one side owns particularly. So I hope that we will all conduct ourselves somewhat better in the forthcoming election. And on that, Madam Deputy Speaker, you have morphed into a different chair now, but I will conclude, other than to say that I will oppose the amendment for the 9th. If we end up with the 9th, so be it, but it is so much better if we stick to the tradition of always voting on a Thursday, which is something constituents very clearly understand.
Michael Tomlinson.
Very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, for calling me to speak. I'm going to make a change in tack from the previous three speakers and actually speak to some of the amendments that have been put down. But I do want to pick up a point from my honourable friend, the member from Briggle, who actually makes a really important point at the end of his speech. We all heard, Madam Deputy Speaker, about a kinder, gentler politics. And I want to pick up what my honourable friend said and say that I entirely agree with him. And I look forward, like him, to fighting a positive campaign on the issues and seeing that kinder, gentler politics on the doorsteps, and perhaps in our conduct and in each of our conducts as well. And perhaps that's a pledge that we can each make right here and right now. I'm also following my right honourable friend, the member for East Devon, and his contribution. And may I say what a great pleasure it was to hear him speak. And I hope he heard the cheers from the back benches when we effectively crying for more. We couldn't believe that he is retiring at such a young age, and this House will be deprived of his voice in future parliaments. And I say that with all sincerity. It was a great pleasure to hear him make a small contribution to this particular debate following such a distinguished career in this place. It's been a great pleasure working alongside him in a number of campaigns. I want to join the honourable member for Edinburgh East, who did welcome, I think, very briefly, the technical amendment that's been laid down in the name of my honourable friend, the Minister. And I too welcome that technical amendment, and I will be supporting it. In fact, I hope that that it's not pressed to a division. But I want to turn to the amendment that's been tabled, amendment number 2, I think it is, in relation to the date. Because we eventually heard, after a 10-minute speech from the honourable gentleman, him turn to the clauses themselves, the amendment, and he gave what I thought were rather weak reasons as to why he preferred the 9th to the 12th. Like my honourable friend, I'm perfectly prepared to fight an election on a Monday as much as a Thursday. It seems to me that that's perhaps not the key point. But there are two key reasons, I think, why the 12th is to be preferred. The first is in relation to the Northern Ireland business. It seems to me incredibly important that the Northern Ireland Executive and the budget can actually complete its stages so that the civil service can be in good shape, and so that we can see nurses, doctors, teachers paid. Yes, of course I do.
I was listening very carefully to the speech that he is referring to, and I was slightly struck by no real explanation as to why it makes a difference where a student may cast their vote, cast it at home or cast it at their university. They can do a postal vote if necessary.
Well, I'm very grateful indeed to my right honourable friend, and in fact evidence shows that 70% of students cast their vote in their hometown in any event. It seems to me to make no difference as to whether it's during term time or not. And that seems to miss the point that in fact most terms close on the 13th. They don't close on the 12th, they don't close on the 9th. Most close either on the 13th or in fact the week after. Therefore, this wheeze, as it does seem to me to be a wheeze, a point of division, as my honourable friend said, it doesn't even work at face value, because the students would still be in place on the 12th as much as they would. Yes, of course I'll give way.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. As a school governor, I know the disruption it has caused to schools which are used as polling stations when a poll is conducted on the Thursday. Quite often it means children will miss A, the Thursday, if the school has to close, and B, many parents will keep their children off on the Friday as well and have an extended weekend. That would be circumvented if the poll was to take place on a Monday, because parents would bring their children in Tuesday to Friday. And so it does, I'm afraid to say, I'm being told across the chamber that it's a load of nonsense. But as a school governor of about 37 years' experience, that I do know that to be the case on many occasions, that kids unfortunately do miss important days of education. And if that can be avoided by doing this in some schools, it's good for that reason only.
In response, there's quite a lot of chatter going on, and it makes it quite difficult to hear the Speaker and the interventions from others. So if colleagues want to have conversations, perhaps they could leave the chamber. But it's obviously a fascinating debate, and we all want to get the most out of it. So, Michael Tomlinson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the fact that you're listening to me makes me so pleased, and it does make me smile. But I take very seriously the intervention from the honourable gentleman, and I too have been a school governor, not of as great experience as him, and I certainly bow to him in the number of years that he's been a school governor. But it does seem to me that his point doesn't actually make a difference as to whether it's on a Monday or a Thursday. I would prefer that no school days were in fact disrupted, and I would prefer it if local authorities could find alternative venues, which from time to time they can. And we all know that there are polling stations that are put up that are temporary polling stations that have to be done, and sometimes this can be done at short notice. But I take his point very seriously, but I don't see that it makes a difference as to whether it's on the Monday or the Thursday, and that particularly has an impact on the schools. If it is, can I just finish this point, and then I will certainly give way further. It seems to me that if a school is going to be interrupted, it may as well be interrupted on a Thursday as on a Monday. I heard his point about the Friday, but I don't, certainly in my more limited experience to his, it hasn't been the case that I have seen or witnessed that schools therefore have extended the weekend, if you like. But I understand the point that he was trying to make, but I really don't think that it makes a difference if it's the Thursday or the Monday. My view, for what it's worth, is that schools, if at all possible, shouldn't be disrupted, and that we should find temporary polling stations. Can I give way first of all to my old friend and then to my old friend?
I'm friend for giving way, but on the issue of access to polling stations, he may also wish to consider the fact that my electoral registration officers in Suffolk tell me that actually getting access to village halls and many of the other places where votes will take place on a Sunday to prepare for a Monday election is particularly challenging. And I wonder whether he'd reflect upon that in terms of actually the importance of having the election on a later date in the week and actually sticking with Thursdays, which is what is conventional.
Well, I'm very grateful indeed for my honourable friend's intervention, because that's a point that I hadn't considered before his intervention. But it is a really live issue, with polling stations opening early in the morning. For example, with village halls in Dorset as much as in Suffolk, who is going to hand over the key? When is that going to be collected? Practicalities such as that. I think my old friend has made a very powerful point, and a third reason, perhaps to my previous two, as to why the Thursday should be preferred to the Monday. I'll give way to my old friend.
And he's making some very important points. I was going to reiterate the point my old friend has made, because the halls need to be prepared on a Sunday.